Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it. "Steve, where are you?" the wife shouted outside. "I'm here," she heard from somewhere deep in the yard. Ellison walked down the path. She saw her husband standing with a shovel. She was surprised it was too early to dig anything. When she walked over, she realized what was there. She smiled. Well, finally, she had been asking him to clean the cesspool for a long time. "Oh, do you know how much is in here?" Steve had a bandage on his face. "That's okay, but it'll be a decent toilet." She walked over to him and kissed him. The woman had wanted a restroom outside for a long time. There was one in the house too. But when a big company gathered outside, it was not comfortable to go indoors. And now, she was glad that her husband had listened to her. Stiva looked out the window in the morning. The shovel was bothering her eyes, urging her to take it and work. He had long promised Ellison that he would make the toilet clean, but he couldn't get his hands on it, and it was unpleasant. He gathered his thoughts, got up and thought that today he would do everything. There was nowhere to put it off. He went out into the yard, took a tool of labor, and went to a small wooden structure. It took some huffing and puffing, but he got it sideways. Well, here we go. He put gloves on his hands and got to work. It was hard, but the man tried. When the job was half done, Steve decided to take the waste cart to the dump. He climbed out, looked at himself, wondered how he was going to get on. But then he waved goodbye and drove the cart down the path. He came back, jumped off again, and the work continued. Suddenly, the shovel bumped into something hard. Steve tried next to it, but it was there too. "Ground can't be so hard," he said to himself, and poked the shovel further and harder. But nothing came out. "Ellison, Ellison, come here," he shouted in the direction of the house. "What?" 5 minutes later, the woman was here. "Look," the man poked with the shovel in several places. A resounding thud could be heard. "What's in there?" She looked at her husband in surprise. "Treasure," he laughed. "You say that too," she smiled. "Okay, go, I'll get it. I'll call you Steve and his wife back." Still no help. The man started fumbling for the trim of what was here. It turned out the thing was not small. Steve huffed and puffed, tried but could do nothing. Then he dropped everything and went into the summer shower. There he quickly stripped off a layer of dirt, put on another robe, and went after his neighbor. "Hi, Logan." He walked up to the fence and saw the man chopping wood. "Hey," he straightened up. "Come on, I need some help," called out to him. "What have you got there again?" Logan didn't refuse, but he went reluctantly. "I was cleaning out the cesspool today and I found something," he began to explain. "Treasure?" Just like Steve suggested the neighbor. "I don't know, but I told my wife the same thing." The man was cheerful. They went into the yard. "What a smell you have here," the neighbor grumbled. "Nothing. You'll get used to it." He led Logan to the hole. "Wow," Logan looked at the find. "You should change your clothes." The neighbor looked at him. He went to the barn and brought Logan some old clothes. When he had changed his clothes, the work continued. But the two of them couldn't get anything out. The box, or whatever it was, wouldn't budge. "I'll go get Lucas." Logan looked at his neighbor. "Yeah, just take off your clothes," Steve warned him. "I'm just going to the fence." He didn't want to waste time. He was already interested in what could be there. Sergei came to the rescue very quickly. He was already in his work clothes. Logan warned him. The three of us worked together. They managed to shovel a little bit, and friends with crowbars picked it up. Now all that was left was to get everything upstairs. The neighbors were all muddy and their hands were slipping, but they were getting closer to the goal. When the big box was on the ground, the men looked at the find and each began to sketch out ideas of what it might be. "It looks like a coffin," said one, saying either it was getting scary. "All right, showers are over there. You go ahead and I'll do the work here, Steve commanded them. He went to the fence, took off the hose, untwisted it, hooked it to the water. The strong jet immediately began to wash away the dirt and everything else. The further the box became clean, Steve became convinced of his friend's words. It was indeed a coffin, but not a simple one, but a zinc one. When the friends returned, they opened their mouths. They stood there stunned and stared at the find. "Is it like that?" Logan asked. As you can see, Steve didn't know what to do or say next. He also went to take a shower like the others. Work was definitely over for the day. Steve called out to his wife when she came out to look. She, and crouched down. "Steve, that's it." She spoke softly, her voice shaking. "Can't you see?" He walked over to her. "I can see, but how? Where from?" Allison cried. Steve and Ellison had long dreamed of buying an apartment. They were very picky. The couple had met recently, both had marriage under their belt, children, but there was no love. They saw each other and there was an instant spark between them. "Allison, are you in love?" her friend asked her when they met again. "You have no idea." The woman looked at Leslie in shock. "Where did you fall in love?" The woman didn't understand. "I will tell. You will not believe," smiled modestly Allison. Leslie sat back down and picked up her wine glass. They had a certain day to meet. Then the girlfriends put aside all their business and went to the countryside, where Leslie had a small cottage. All day long they'd just sit and drink wine and talk. "You know me. I never spend money for nothing," began her story Allison. "What's that got to do with it?" My friend was surprised. And that day, everything was going wrong for me. I was going to work in the morning. I put on my tights and I noticed an arrow on the way out. I looked at my shoes. I couldn't even wear them without tights. And I was upset. Allison sat down in the chair across from me. "So, you went to the store and met him?" Leslie was trying to guess. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. She put on her old sandals, which were comfortable without pantyhose, and hurried to work. Of course she was late. There was no other way. She sipped from her glass. "So what?" She couldn't wait for Leslie's climax. The day went on as usual. At the end of the workday, I turned everything off and left the office. When I went down the stairs, I caught my heel on something and flew down. Leslie at that moment groaned and made big eyes. "And he caught you?" Again she interjected. "Either you're listening or I'm not telling." Allison took offense. "Come on." She straightened her back. When she got to her feet, she realized there was a slight sprain. There was no heel on the sandal. So I sat down on these unfortunate steps. And then he appeared, the prince on a white horse, and saved you. Ira was getting sarcastic. "All right, I see you have your own stories and you're not interested in mine." Ellison got up and went to get some snacks. "Come on," her friend followed her. "No offense, you just tell everything in such detail." She caught up and hugged Allison. They walked back in, sitting back down in their seats. I'm sitting there crying. I don't know how to go home. I see a cab waiting nearby. I'm glad. But then I realize it's going to cost a lot of money. She raised a finger. "So that's what frugality is all about," she smiled. "Yes," Allison agreed, and the driver saw it, and he got out of the car and came toward me. "I'm telling you, a prince," Leslie laughed. "Okay, so be it." Allison didn't argue with her. "What happened next?" she said, waiting for her friend to continue. "He came over and asked me what I could do to help. I showed him my swollen foot and heel, and he smiled. Then he helped me up and led me to the car. I didn't resist. We got in the car. Steve started talking to me. I was sitting there, and his talk gave me goosebumps." Allison blushed and looked at her friend. "Really? You felt it right away?" Leslie wasn't laughing now. He admitted later that he had something like that, Allison said. Wow, did you invite him over? My friend was curious. I wanted to, but I was shy. We got to my house and I got out and I couldn't stand on my feet. So he ran out, gave me his hand. I leaned on him. The perfume I smelled made me almost faint. Steve took me to my apartment and looked at me, but I couldn't understand what he wanted. They laughed later about the fact that he was waiting for payment, laughed Allison. God, that's so Donaldick. Leslie stood up and added wine to the glasses. I didn't dare ask him out. I thought we'd never meet again, she chided herself. And the next day I got ready for work, stretched my leg, put on comfortable shoes, went out, and he is standing at the entrance. The woman blushed again. He came for money, guessed her friend. I thought so too, and he came out, invited me into the car, opened the door. I said I'd walk, but Steve insisted. He said it was a gesture of help. No payment. Allison was silent for a second, remembering something. That's how you two met, Leslie concluded instead. You could say that. After that, he came to pick me up in the evening, and then I was no longer shy. I told him to come up. I'll buy you tea. That's where we met at the table and got to know each other properly. Now together, while we communicate. But he calls to move to him. She put a glass on the table. How interesting. And they say there are no coincidences. Leslie was silent. After sitting down, Allison told her friend to come and visit her. She would introduce her to Steve. Leslie couldn't miss such an opportunity, so she agreed to come. They agreed on what day it would happen and went home. Steve was warned about the meetings with her friend, so he did not bother with calls and questions. When Allison was already home, she dialed him herself. Hi. She still felt awkward. It's young people getting to know each other, going out, texting, and they're doing the same. I've been waiting for your call, he said in his beautiful voice. Come over. She called him every time because she didn't want to meet on his turf. I'll be there soon, he hung up and Allison started cooking. Steva arrived as promised. Their evenings passed monotonously. First they would sit at the table, drinking tea or wine. Then they'd go to a room, watch a movie, talk, but it never went any further. And one day, Steva came to see Allison. Why are you all dressed up? She didn't understand. Leslie was supposed to visit them today. Can't I wear a suit? He couldn't understand. Are you getting ready to meet my friend? The woman smiled. You could say that. I want to look at the highest level, Steva admitted. Good. She'll be here soon. Allison knew Leslie was never late. And indeed, at exactly 7 p.m., the bell rang, the landlady opened the doors. Her girlfriend stood on the doorstep. Hi. She handed her a bottle of champagne and a box of chocolates. Come on in. Allison let her through the door. Leslie walked into the kitchen. There was a handsome man sitting at the table. She smiled at him and said hello. Allison's been telling me about you, he told her. And what did she tell you about me? Leslie smiled and looked at her friend. Nothing bad, only good. Steva offered a woman a chair to sit on. This evening was a little more fun than usual. Leslie was telling different stories that she and Allison had going on. And then, when her husband left her, she got to this point. Please don't then put her hand on hers. Okay, I'm sorry. Please don't. Leslie stopped talking. Did your divorce with him go badly somehow? Steve asked. In principle. Everything is fine, but I do not really want to remember these moments, especially in front of you. She raised her eyes to the man. Okay, you do not want, so we will not. Steva was ready to do everything to make only this woman was happy. Afterward, they went to see Leslie off, and on the way back, Steva suggested sitting down on a bench. Why? Let's go home, Allison asked him. Wait, he waited until she sat down. Then he pulled something out of his breast pocket, got down on one knee, and handed the woman a ring. Steve, are you sure? Allison had been self-conscious about her age all along. More than ever, he told her, took her face in his palms and kissed her on the lips. It made her feel so happy that everything trembled inside. They went home happy. Will you stay? Alison asked her boyfriend for the first time. "If you let me, I'll stay," he told her, honestly. That evening they got serious. Alison knew she would give the man a positive answer. She sat in front of the mirror and looked at herself. Yes, 45. But not old yet. She began to smooth her face. She began to smooth her face. She began to smooth her afraid of how they would react. Her son Austin had long ago graduated from college, now lived and worked in another city, and had recently started a family. Her daughter was also enrolled and pleased her mother with her grades. Alison called first her son and then her daughter, inviting them to visit. The daughter was due this weekend and the son said he'd be there too. That's when she'd introduce everyone and talk about getting married. "Steve, don't you want to invite your kids?" she called him the next day. "They won't go," he said with certainty. "Why do you think so?" The woman was surprised. "Their mother decides everything for them." His voice was sad. "Well, don't be sad." She wished him and hung up. Everything was fine. The brother and sister met on Saturday. The mother was dressed up. "Mom, what's going on?" Olga was the first to arrive. "In the evening you'll find out." She was laughing. She was happy. Since their father left, the children have never seen her like that. "What secrets?" Julia went into the room. Austin entered the apartment. "Oh, it smells good." He sniffed the air with his nose. "Hi." Alison came out to him. "Wow," he gave a thumbs up in admiration. Trying hard, the mother hugged her son. After that, a friend came. She knew that Alison would introduce Steve to the children, but about the proposal was a complete surprise. "Who are we waiting for? Let's go to the table, because I'm very hungry," said the young man. "Let's wait a minute," his mother asked. She kept looking at her watch. "And who are we waiting for?" he asked everyone who was here. "Where's your wife?" His mother changed the subject. "She has no time." Something about work. The daughter with her mother-in-law. He immediately answered all the questions. "Good." Just as she said that, the doorbell rang. Alison got up from her seat, her cheeks flaming. She walked over and opened it. A man entered the apartment. "Meet Steve. This is Steve." She introduced him to the kids. Julia stepped out to him, the girl. Austin shook the young man's hand. "I am very pleased to meet the children of my favorite woman." Steve was gallant. "And now we can go to the table," said Alison cheerfully. And they all walked together into the hall. "You haven't said a word for so long, have you? It's obvious that you're not the first day together." The son looked at his mother and put a pie on his plate. "I'm sorry, but I felt a little uncomfortable, embarrassed or something. And yesterday Steve proposed to me, and she raised her hand with the ring, deciding there was no more time. Mommy, congratulations. Uncle Steve's a great choice." Her daughter came up to her. "I'm telling her the same thing," said Leslie. "When's the wedding?" my son asked. "I don't know. We haven't been anywhere yet, but if everything goes well, it'll be in a month." The woman gibbered and looked at Steve. Yes, he was in agreement with his wife, to be on everything. They sat talking who was talking about what. The children stayed at their mother's and Steve needed to go home. He called Leslie for a ride. She didn't refuse. "See you later, love," he kissed Steve's hand. "Bye, darling," she smiled. "Mom, you're lucky," she and her daughter sat in the kitchen. "I don't understand how this could have happened," the woman replied. "Does he have children?" Austin joined them. "Yes, but they don't communicate," Alison told them. "Too bad," shook his head. After everyone had learned the truth, Alison announced the upcoming wedding at work. She herself didn't understand why she was so embarrassed when she talked about it. She hadn't taken anyone away from her family. She hadn't taken anyone away from her family. She hadn't cheated on anyone. What was there to be ashamed of? "Alison, we congratulate you." The co-workers cheered, as did everyone else. "You deserve this happiness," they hugged her. "I invite you all to the wedding," she prostrated. "We will definitely come," agreed those. Steva and Alison applied, just as the woman had said. They were given a date in a month. Now everything had to be thought out and prepared. Steve did everything his future wife asked him to do. He went shopping, to the restaurant, to the atelier, because he realized that the woman already had a lot of problems. Everything was ready. The guests were gathered. It was the happiest day in the life of Ellison and Steve. They were married. Now they had to decide where they would live. Tamara's apartment was small, but it was close to her work in the center. Steve's apartment was bigger, but it would be harder to get to. So far, they had settled on the first option. The woman was comfortable here. Everything was her own. No need to get used to anything. "And let's sell our apartments and buy one large and spacious," suggested the husband to his wife. Why, it was a good offer. She had never even thought of such a thing. Realtors called several times a day, wanted to show options. But the spouses were not satisfied with a lot of things. Old house far away, plumbing doesn't work, and other things. "You're so picky, as if you don't want us to buy something," Steve told her in the evening. "You know, it's true. I don't want an apartment. Let's buy a house in the country," she suggested to him. "What about work?" He didn't understand her. "Yes, it will be far away, but nature, sauna, and everything else," she said dreamily. "Well, let's see the options." Steve immediately dialed the realtor and said that their plans had changed. By the time Ellison had found the cabin, the man's apartment had already been sold. He now had enough money to buy the house. "You wanted to sell mine too, didn't you?" Ellison wondered. "Let there be at least some housing in the city," her husband told her judiciously. "That's right too, Olga will come there," she agreed with him. Now Steve and Ellison drove through the villages and looked at the options that had been offered to them. "This house has been empty for a long time," the specialist told them. "I like it," said Ellison. She walked inside, looked outside. "Everything she wanted, bathhouse, vegetable garden, outbuildings, we'll take it. It took you so long to decide on an apartment, and you bought the house on the click. Was surprised by the young man who offered them all this. I guess I just wanted it more than a concrete box," Allison admitted. "If everything is perfect, we can do the paperwork," the realtor said. "We're in," the couple said in unison. Ellison took a vacation at work, wanted to do everything quickly, to move in now. The first thing the woman did was to get acquainted with the neighbors. She went first to one, then to another. A week later, a housewarming party was celebrated in their yard. Of course, the house was not ready to move in yet, but she wanted to make people happy. "I think you'll be fine here," said Selena, who was Logan's wife. "We hope so," Allison was sure. First, Steve put up the walls, then the roof. The neighbors helped when they had time. And today it was down to the cesspool, and there it was. Allison couldn't get away from what she saw. She looked at her husband with big eyes. "Should we open it up?" he asked. "Do you think the genie will come out of there?" Logan teased him. "Yeah, bad idea," the man shook his head. He finished his work for the day, putting the wooden box back in place. Threw a top over what they'd found so as not to scare anyone. "We should go see the old-timers, see if they know anything," Ellison suggested tonight. "Tomorrow, I think everyone will know about this case and someone will find it," Steve said. They went to bed, but neither could sleep, both of them thinking about the terrible discovery. "What else have you thought of?" the man asked his wife. He wanted to get away from the sorrowful thoughts. "We should bury it," said Allison. "Yes, but first to find out what was going on," he realized. As Steve had anticipated, the next day everyone knew what he had found in the cesspool. But whoever Ellison asked about the former tenants, they just said, "No, I don't know." "I know there was a big family that lived here," said Selena, the neighbor. She and Logan, like Steve and Allison, had just moved in. The police should be called, Logan was sure. "Yeah, they definitely look into it," Steve agreed. He didn't wait for other advice, dialed a number and called the police. The police arrived, and they were told everything, in some places even interjecting. "You didn't open it?" the officer asked. "Of course not," Allison's eyes bulged. The coffin had been removed, taken away for identification and other matters. Ellison had seen it all. She had asked her husband to go into town for a few days to get away from the horror she had experienced the day before. Okay, as usual, he gave a positive answer. They drove to Ellison's apartment, talking the whole way about how it could have been someone's son or husband. The only thing that was unclear was how he ended up where Steve had found him. I'll tell you what, we'll probably live here until things clear up, he said to his wife, who didn't mind. Are you going to go there? Allison asked him. Yes, I'll go tomorrow and see if I can find someone else, he said, while he was thinking about something. Good then, I'll get on with work and other things. Allison didn't even want to think about it. Steve, as promised in the morning, got ready and went to the place where they had already settled down. He went straight to Logan's house. They first sat him down at the table to have breakfast. How is it here? Is it quiet? Asked the guest to the hosts. Nothing, said the friend. Interesting. Steve pressed his lips together. You know, I was thinking, there are still people here. They live there far beyond the village. They say there are old people. Maybe you can ask around. Logan suggested him. Great idea. I didn't even know where to start. Steve got up and went to the door. If you need help, just whistle, Logan told him in his back. As always, Steve looked around and walked out of the house. He circled the country roads for a long time. Couldn't find anyone. But when he saw the houses in the distance, he got excited. And when he drove up, he realized he'd done it prematurely. Almost all of them were shriveled and leaning, as if no one had been here for years. Hey, what are you looking for? He saw a little grandmother. Hello, I wanted to know something about the village. He pointed in the direction. What's interesting there? She was mumbling. We recently moved in. We were renovating and then we found something. I'd like to know about the people who lived there before us. Steve talked on and on. Let's go. She beckoned him into the yard beyond the gate. Thank you. He followed the old woman. They entered the gates, which were shriveled from time. Steve looked around. It was obvious that nothing had been done here for a long time. There were huge, unsawed logs all over the yard. Maybe you need some firewood, the man asked the old woman. If you want to, so steak, she said indifferently, and the man took a cleaver. He took off his jacket and got to work. When there was enough firewood, in Steve's opinion, he finished and went into the house, where the grandmother had long since disappeared. That's enough for now. He sat down on a chair. Who's going to wash your hands? She told him sternly. Well, where? He looked. There was no wash basin anywhere. There, behind the stove. She pointed to the curtain. The man got up, washed his face, and went back to his seat. Grandmother moved very nimbly about her kitchen. She put milk and bread on the table and pulled a cast iron with potatoes from the stove. Thank you. He couldn't wait to start eating. What's your name? A woman came to the bench and sat down. Steve, he said in an open and friendly way. And I'm Georgia. Grandma took a spoon. Thank you and pleasant. He started to eat too. After work, it was straightforward to feel hungry. So what did you want to know there? Georgia asked. You probably don't know. We stopped by a house that had been empty for a long time, and there were these. The man stopped talking. You mean them? She asked. I don't even know. He looked at her surprised. Don't look. I used to live in that village too. I was their neighbor. She stood up, went to the sideboard and pulled out the photos. What are these? He took pictures she held out to him. This is the family you're talking about. She pointed her finger at a card. I don't know. I didn't notice Steve's house at first. There were 3 people standing in the photo, husband and wife and Grandma Georgia. Of course, she was younger then. And then the man saw that they were standing near the very house where he and Allison now live. Did you get a good look at it? Grandma smiled. Yes, this is the house where we live now. Or rather, we are going to. He put the picture on the table. All those people had a hard fate. Who would have thought it when 2 young and healthy people came to the village? She shook her head. Do you know their story? Vanya was very interested in it. How not to know? They were like children to me, the old woman marveled. Will you tell me? He fixed his eyes on her. It's a long and sad story. It seemed that Georgia was about to cry. Of course, I have to go to town to see my wife, but I want to get to the bottom of it, he assured her. So be it. I'll tell you what happened to them. She got up, washed her hands, wiped the corners of her mouth with a handkerchief. Then she came again and sat down on the bench, put her feet up so she was comfortable, and looked at Steve. The village was prosperous then. We had everything. We worked, lived, enjoyed every day. The only thing was that the collective farm was short of hands. We wanted young people to come. But the young people at that time did not care about the village. They tried to manage somehow on their own. And then, what a joy. 2 young men arrived at once, Trevor and Katie. He's an agronomist and she's a medic. We welcomed them like honored guests. They were given a cottage, the same one you live in now. The boys were unmarried, so for about 2 years we talked them into getting married. Finally, they did, and Trevor proposed to Katie. Oh, how fun it was then. The whole village went out. Beer, kvass, wine flowed by the river, and the snacks were unprecedented. The old lady was silent, probably imagining how they had partied. And what happened then? To be honest, Steve was not very interested in the biography of young people. He wanted to get to the heart of the matter. But he was afraid to tell the woman about his find, in case she got sick. I was their neighbor at that time. Every day they came to visit me. Then we had tea. Then with Katie made cakes for Trevor. They were soulful people. She stood up and walked over to the table to pour herself some tea. Why were they? Are they gone now? Steve asked. I don't know about that. She sipped her tea. After what happened to them. They didn't live long. And then they left, and I never saw them again. Grandma brushed away an invisible tear with her handkerchief. What happened to them? I wanted to find out quickly and go home. It's bad. The old lady shook her head. Kathy, are you sure you want to live in the village? You're so young. A young man asked her. If they sent me from the institute, then I have to go, she assured him. Well, Trevor and Katie met when they were students. She was in medical school and he was in agricultural school. They graduated, and when Trevor found out that Katie was sent to work in the countryside, he asked to go there himself. But now, when the time came, he regretted his choice. No. He still loved Kathy, but he didn't want to live in the village all his life. Why don't we work for a few years and then leave? He asked her. Well, after a few years, we'll see, she told him. As soon as the chairman learned that 2 young people were coming to him, he immediately allocated them a house. The girl and the young man quickly settled there, whitewashed the walls, and painted the floors. They were sociable, so everyone in the village knew and loved them. Aunt Georgia, Katie called her neighbor. What do you want? She turned around. Come and visit me. I baked a pie, she called her. She was happy to come, and they sat at the table chatting and drinking tea. At some point, the whole village began to persuade them to get married, but Kathy said that she was still young and it was too early. And after 6 months, the girl felt that she was not alone. She told her husband about it. There was nowhere to go. The wedding was going to take place anyway. Oguli Vali her to the glory and began a simple life of 2 people who lived together. Oh, kicking, Katie sat on the couch. Then her husband would lie on her belly and listen. It's like there's not just one baby in there, but a whole team, he would say as he felt kicks through her belly. You know, I feel like there's more than one baby in there too. Katie confirmed his words. What do the doctors say? He asked her. Who says what? She said. It wasn't very complicated. Katie was pregnant. And when she had to give birth, she'd invited her Aunt Georgia and another one, who was a medic. She went to the nurse's station where she worked. Why are you here? Georgia asked her when she got there. I don't want to go to town. It's far away and no one close to you will come to you, the girl said. Okay, as you know, we'll deliver the baby. We've done it more than once, the woman assured her. Okay, I'll give you a hint if anything. Katie was so small and her belly was climbing up to her forehead. When it started, the women scooted in. Katie breathed. She knew how to do it right. Push, shouted Georgia, and girls started. Time passed very slowly. The pain was unbearable. There, a woman lifted the baby in her arms, a boy. The second woman took it from Georgia. Katie had no time to rejoice, but the pain came again. What's that? The neighbor was frightened. The second one, Katie exhaled. Oh my God, it was starting again. After a few minutes, and the second little boy was in the woman's arms. You knew? Why didn't you tell me? Georgia threatened with her finger. It's okay, was the exhausted girl. The babies were bathed and placed next to their mother. What are you going to name them? The one who had just delivered the babies was delighted. Anthony and Donald, Katie, lay back and looked at her babies. Anthony was mobile. He was roaring and active. Donald, on the other hand, lay motionless. What's wrong with him? Kathy asked. That's for you to tell me. Georgia shook her head. She wanted to get up, but Katie couldn't do it. When it all came out, it turned out that the boy had been born disabled. He was just like his brother, except that he developed differently. Katie cried a lot. Trevor supported her in everything, but there was nothing to do. She would never leave the baby. From the day they were home, all her time was devoted to Donald. Of course, Anthony wasn't without his mother's love either, but he could do a lot on his own. You take such good care of them, Trevor often said. They're my little blood. The mother held her sons in her arms. Let me help. Her husband never said no when his help was needed. Kathy would give Anthony to her husband, and she would sit with Donald. The boys were growing up. Anthony was already walking, and Donald was still sitting on his mother's lap. She went to hospitals, went to witch doctors, took the child to the witch doctor, all to no avail. I'm going to work. Hang in there. The husband kissed his wife and left. It was hard, but Katie coped with everything. Georgia helped her. When it was necessary to go to work, the girl could not. She wrote a letter of resignation. She had a disabled son in her arm. It was sad. People started coming to her house for her to see them and treat them if needed. Anthony, stop it, yelled the mother to her son as he molested his brother. Why him? The boy pouted. Often the boy had to stand in the corner for hurting his brother. Katie worked with her son. She gave him massages and medication. By the time it was time to go to kindergarten, Donald could already move a little independently. The mother rejoiced at her son's first successes. She did not give up, took him to doctors, practiced herself. Anthony, get ready for kindergarten, his mother told him. She had already dressed Donald and was waiting for her second son. Why do you always dress him and not me? The boy took offense. Let me help you. She put Donald in the stroller and went over to her son. After that, they would go to the garden. Donald would babble something in the stroller. After one son went to the garden, Kathy felt better. She had more time at home. She did the laundry, ironed, took care of Donald, did the housework. Everyone who knew her in the village often came and helped her. Some with clothes, food, some even gave her money. Katie refused, but they shoved her down. How was your day today? Trevor would ask in the evening. He came when the whole family was already gathered. It was fine. The girl would get up and kiss her husband. By the time the boys reached school age, the mother decided to put Donald in the first grade. He could walk. His head was working properly. She invested so much effort in the boy that she hoped for understanding of the leadership of the educational institution. Let's see how he will behave, how other children will accept him, did not refuse her. Trevor, Donald got into the first grade. She rejoiced in the evening. Are you sure he'll do well? Her husband doubted. In knowledge I have pulled him up. He is not inferior to ordinary children. She was surprised at Trevor's distrust. Anthony and Donald walked to their first call on their own feet. Katie was only a little supportive of her son. How worried she had been when they first left for lessons. All day long she sat wondering how her boys were doing. Had they fought? Had they had a fight? Mom, Anthony, came running into the house. Where's Donald? She looked behind him. He'll be here in a minute. He's a cripple, laughed his brother. What are you talking about? And where did you hear that word? If the parents needed to go somewhere or to work in the garden, they left the boys with Georgia, who didn't mind. Who's gonna school? A neighbor came in the evening. We did, the boys shouted with glee. They all sat down together at the table and ate the delicious pie the woman brought. Thank you, you always help us out, Katie told her. And the woman saw how hard it was for her. She hadn't started a family herself, and now it was too late. Georgia loved Kathy like a daughter, and her children were her grandchildren. Trevor worked, the children grew up, and now it seemed that the family was restored. By winter, Kathy decided to go out to work. The residents rejoiced because they had never found anyone. There was one doctor who came from out of town, but he only lasted 6 months. If you need anything, you ask for it right away. Don't be shy, the neighbor told her. It's a must, the girl thanked her. Trevor often came to the neighbor's house after work. She'd buy him tea and he'd cry on her shoulder. What is it this time? The woman sat down at the table, on which there were candies and gingerbread. Nothing, Katie's pitiful. He took a sip of tea. What's there to feel sorry for? Look how well she did. She got the boy back on his feet. Georgia understood him, but she shouldn't be like him. I can't stand to see her doing all this. And then she comes into the bedroom and drops dead, Trevor said. She'd come up to him and stroke his head. It was often like that. Katie knew Trevor went there, but she didn't say anything because she knew he was tired too. The man worked 2 jobs to make money for the family. Kathy, why don't we go to the seaside and have a vacation? He suggested it one day. Now the boys are on vacation. We'll definitely go. She knew it would be very good for Donald. And as soon as the boys finished first grade, they bought train tickets. Mom, it's so nice here, said Donald on the sand. Yes, son. She looked up and saw Trevor and Anthony splashing in the water. Here the couple had a chance to spend some quality time together. Did you get some rest? Trevor asked her when they had gone to bed. Yes, thank you, sweetheart. She kissed his shoulder. Everyone went home in a positive mood. There was a great mood. Nobody forgot about the neighbor. They brought her some shells and beautiful stones from the sea. Well, how? She was already waiting for them at the gate of their house. Fine, smiled the family. Anthony was pestering his brother again. Calm down, the mother threatened them with a finger. Within a day, she was already out at work. Georgia was with the boys now. A month passed. Kathy sat in her office. Grandpa Frank came in to see her. What's troubling you? She got up from her chair, abruptly dizzy. Kathy fainted. Daughter, what's wrong with you? Bent over, her grandfather bent over her. She opened her eyes and smiled. Grandpa Frank gave her the same smile. I guess I'll be going. He got to his feet and walked toward the exit. Katie didn't stick around either. She was in a hurry to get home. What are you doing here? Georgia was surprised that she'd come so early. I think we're going to have another family member soon, Kathy said excitedly. Oh, really? The neighbor said excitedly. They sat down at the table, poured tea, and waited for Trevor to come home from work. When he came, the women told him everything. It was very happy news. By the end of the summer, it was clear that Katie was not wrong. She was really expecting a child. It's a girl, Georgia told her. How do you know? Katie turned to her. Look what a lifeline, laughed the neighbor. Kathy was feeling bad now. She was nauseous all the time. It was hard to go to work. But she kept going. Her fellow villagers felt sorry for her again. During her pregnancy, the girl had lost a lot of weight. She looked sickly. What if she was sick again? She shared her fears with her neighbor. Do not think about it ahead of time, she advised. Trevor became more attentive to his wife. The boys realized that the mother is difficult. They tried not to bother her with their arguments, behaved quietly. Anthony and Donald were in the 2nd grade. Now that his mother was lying at home, Donald had a hard time. He did not understand much in his studies, and the woman could not help. Trevor tried his best, but he couldn't keep up with all these tasks either. Stop shouting, you see. Mama's not well. Sometimes he broke down into a shout. He understood that it was hard for Katie to hear and see it. The labor started suddenly. It wasn't due yet. It scared Katie even more. She woke Trevor. He quickly ran to get Georgia. Now it was just the two of them. Trevor took the boys into the other room. No one was sleeping that night. It hurt, moaned Katie. "Oh, girl, you should go to the hospital," worried the neighbor. The child was walking forward. "We'll get through this," Katie said. Georgia had delivered babies, but she didn't have that much experience. She twirled her belly. Finally, Katie stopped her. "It's starting," she shouted so loudly that Donald in the next room flinched and clung to his brother. No one was keeping track of time, but as it began to get light outside the window, a baby's cries echoed through the house. "Well, thank God," Trevor exhaled and hugged the children. Daughter Georgia came out of the room. She was so tired, as if she had not delivered a baby and unloaded coal. "How are you?" Man looked into the room. "Good." His wife nodded to him. He walked over and looked at his princess and smiled. After that, Katie began to blossom. She and her daughter, who was named Fiona, took her sons to school together, started helping Donald with his studies again. Trevor saw that his wife was healthy. It was visible to the naked eye. The boys continued to study when they were in the 5th grade. Fiona went to kindergarten, and the mother went to kindergarten, and the mother went to work. From that point on, no one worried about anyone. "How's Donald doing?" Patients who came to see Kathy would ask. "You know, the bigger he gets, the less you can see of his handicap," she answered and smiled. "That's great." They thanked and left happy locals. Kathy was happy. Fiona made her happier every day. But the boys, that's another matter. What have you done again? She had to deal with them tonight. Nothing. Why are they calling him names? Anthony said. He always stood up for his brother so that, God forbid, he would not be beaten up or do something worse. I understand all that, but we need to be careful. She pretended to be angry with them. "We're sorry." The brothers apologized as best they could. Katie didn't expect anything bad to happen, so she forgave and kissed her blood. When Fiona had to go to 1st grade, the boys were already in 8th grade. That's where the trouble started. Anthony got mixed up with a bad crowd, started doing all sorts of naughty things. And most importantly, he dragged his brother along with him. "What's that smell?" Mom asked me at night. "Mom, we're adults," Anthony told her. She could see that Donald was not feeling well. He was standing and swaying. "Son, what's the matter with you?" Kathy was frightened. "I need to lie down," the man said. And then all night long, the woman didn't sleep. Not only did she have to help her daughter do her homework, she had to run after her sons, and in the morning she had to go to work. "Trevor, talk to them," she begged her husband. "I can only whip them." He clenched his fists. "Why go to extremes?" Katie didn't understand. "You and your good nature will only make things worse," he told his wife. "I'm asking for your help." Kathy began to cry. "All right, I'll talk to you tomorrow," he promised. Katie hoped so. And then something happened that made her mother feel so bad that she had to go to the hospital. The boys were 15 years old, and that night they were out for a long time. At first the parents were not worried. Their sons could sometimes stay out late. But when it was 2 a.m, the mother and father were not on a joke frightened. Katie went outside. She went and knocked on George's door. She, though asleep, got dressed and went outside. "Shall we walk around the village?" the woman asked her. "Shall we split up?" The neighbor suggested it. "No, together first," Katie disagreed. They walked on, knocking on every house with a light on, but there were no boys anywhere. They reached the end of the village where the quarry was. They saw a fire burning in the distance. "That way," Katie said. They rushed toward where the light was flickering. "Son," Kathy began to cry. Mom, that's all he could say. "Can you get up?" She tried to get him up, but she couldn't do it. Katie looked at Georgia, who came over, and together they managed to get the boy to his feet. A hand on his shoulder, Katie showed her neighbor. They were weaving some because the guy, who was completely relaxed, was hanging on to them. Presently, they put Donald on a bench a few houses away. She ran, went inside. "Trevor," she called to her husband in a whisper. "What?" They found him. He also spoke because the daughter was already asleep. "Help, please. He's sitting on the bench. Georgia and I just can't carry him already. It's very heavy, she whispered to him, and she was very nervous. Okay, wait, just don't worry. He put something on his feet and ran out of the house. Trevor easily threw the guy on his shoulder and carried him to the house. Put him on the couch. You. He's drunk. He turned away from his son. That's right. And where's Anthony? The mother sat down next to Donald and cried. Why are you crying? They have their own head on their shoulders. Trevor was getting nervous. I know they have a head on their shoulders, but how old are they? Katie continued to cry. If he's not back by morning, we'll report him, the man said unequivocally. By morning, when Donald woke up, the first thing he did was ask for water. Where's Anthony? Kathy bent over him. Anthony? Remembered what had happened yesterday? Anthony, your brother? His mom was standing next to him. Listen, yesterday we met the townspeople. They came to visit us in the village and asked us to take them somewhere where they could make a fire. So we took them to the quarry, and they took bottles out of a bag and started serving them. I don't remember, but I think Anthony went off with them, Donald said. What are you talking about? Kathy ran around the room. She didn't know what to do. What townies? Where did they go? How many of them were there? She began to gather herself. Where are you going? Trevor came out to her. To the precinct, she said. We need to do something. Anthony had left with the townspeople. She was already outside the gate when she saw her son. He was walking, his pants and shirt were torn. His face was bruised. My God, my son, where have you been? What happened to you? She ran up to him. Mom, I need to lie down, he told her practically in syllables. She took him inside and put him on the couch. Is Donald here? That's all he asked. Here, how did you get here? She screamed and cried. Fiona came into the room. She looked at the brothers and could not understand what had happened to them. A few days later, a private man came to their house. Trevor himself was very surprised at his visit. He let the man into the kitchen, and they sat down at the table. Is Anthony home? The man in the uniform asked then. Yes, I'll get him right away. He entered the room. After that, the policeman told everything. A few days ago, your son robbed the store with other boys, the policeman said. That can't be. Katie jumped up from her stool. All the evidence is against him, the cop insisted. What do we do now? The woman didn't understand. Pay the fine and it's all over at once, or I have to take him away, the man said. Okay? We will pay everything, exhaled the woman. She did not understand how from such a boy, which he grew up, could grow up such a bully. Anthony had gotten away with it, but he had gotten the worst of it at home from his father. If you ever lay a hand on another man's property again, you'll know what prison is, a man told him. I get it. The boy didn't look at his father. You know he can't drink. Why don't you keep an eye on it? Katie wondered. Mom, I got it. You could see that the guy was hurt and offended. After that, the boys quieted down a bit. Donald spent most of his time at home, and Anthony was always doing something. His mother wouldn't get out of the principal's office. But nothing else happened after this incident. Kathy began to feel sick, dizzy all the time. No pills helped, but she wouldn't go to the hospital because she was afraid of what they'd say. Katie, what if it gets worse? Georgia admonished her. Thank you for your concern, but I can manage on my own, the woman replied in the same way to everyone. She was tutoring her daughter and trying to counsel the boys. What are we going to wear to the prom? The boys asked their mother. Let's buy you suits, Mom suggested. Good. They cheered. Anthony wanted to go to the city after graduation and work there. Donald didn't know what he wanted to do. His mother couldn't insist, so she just gave advice. Why do you need to go to the city? What do you want there? She cried in the evenings. Everything is possible there now. Earn to live well, her son told her. And you? She turned to Donald. What about me? I'll stay with you. I'll help you. He shrugged his shoulders. What a fool. His brother laughed at him. He's a fool himself. He turned and took a swing at his brother. Katie got so tired of all the arguments that she just walked away. One day she had a seizure and was taken to the hospital. What did you get out of it? The father asked his sons. We'll apologize later, Donald said. Don't let it be too late, sighed the father and left. Katie was fine. She was on a drip, took all the pills she needed, and came home as soon as she felt better. "Forgive us, Mom." Donald came up to her. She hugged him and stood like that for a long time. Fiona had been a quiet and calm girl all these years. She had done well at school, no complaints from her teachers. Lately, she had become interested in socializing with her brothers. "What do you find so interesting with them?" her mother once asked her. "I don't know, just," shrugged the girl. "Just don't go anywhere with them," the woman asked her. "Why not?" She didn't understand, because she's too young. Her mother hugged and kissed her. She didn't have any problems with Fiona at all, she thought to herself. Anthony, just as he'd said he was going to go to the city, was going to do just that. He was getting ready. Graduation was just around the corner. Donald, on the other hand, was more at home. "Fiona, hi," her brother's friends came up to her. "Hi," she looked at them. She liked them. "Shall we go for a walk with us?" the girls called out to her. Of course, she was sure she had nothing to be afraid of with grown-up girls. "Where are your brothers?" the new friends asked. As it turned out later, they specifically came to the girl to find out from her everything about Anthony and Donald, but where she was then to understand it. "I don't know, out walking somewhere." The girl shrugged. Off they went. First they were just in the village, and then they went beyond it as well. There was a forest ahead. Fiona walked up to one girl and took her hand. "Scared?" laughed the girl. "A little." She was only 9 years old. "Don't be afraid, everything will be fine." They had already entered where the big trees grew. "They usually gather at the edge of the forest," one of the girls said. They started to make their way into the deep. "I want to go home." Fiona looked at the girls. "No, we'll find the boys now and then we'll all go together." "I'm tired," Fiona began to moan. "Don't moan," one of her friends told her. They walked out into the clearing. Someone was there. Voices could be heard. "Hello, everyone," came Betty, the bravest of them all. "Oh, the girls are here." A strange young man turned around. "And who are you?" The girl looked perplexed. "And I'm just who you need." He started to get up from the ground. His buddies started to do the same. "Now our guys are coming here. They will show you," said Betty defiantly. "And who are we?" He was looming over her. The other girls stood a little further away. They didn't know what to do. "Fuck you," turned around and walked towards her friends. "What?" Her boyfriend grabbed her by the hair. "Let go," she shouted. The girls went to her friend's rescue. Fiona saw all this. She was scared. She couldn't move. The girls shrieked and ran wherever she was going. At that moment, a terrible thing was happening in the clearing. The one who took the girl by the hair piled her on the ground and went under her skirt. When the others tried to stop him from doing it, the other one came up to them. "Hey, what do you want there?" he said defiantly and pushed them away. "Let her go," almost crying, Catherine said. "Ah, Shay!" "Found fools." The comrade grabbed one that was closer. "Ah!" screamed throughout the forest the girl. Anthony and Donald at this moment appeared in the clearing, and with them another 5 friends. "Who are you? What do you want?" Grabbed the guy who was already lying on Betty. He quickly stood up and grabbed him by the chest. The other girl was freed too. They ran away, and a fight broke out between the guys. They fought to the death. One of the strangers pulled out a knife. "Donald!" his brother shouted, but it was too late. He was stabbed in the side. The boys all pounced on the assailants, and when it was over, Donald was unconscious on the ground, and the attackers had fled into the woods. Cowards. Anthony looked at them. He tried to lift his brother, but he couldn't do it. "Is he breathing?" the boys asked. "I think so." The boy listened to his breathing and felt his brother's pulse. At this time, the girls, who were in shock, ran to the village. They didn't know where Fiona was, so they wanted to check if she was home or not. When they were already at the gate, they didn't dare to knock or enter. What if she's not there? Catherine looked with frightened eyes. "Why did we drag her there in the first place?" began to repent Betty. At this moment from the conversation heard Katie, She came out of the house. "What happened to you girls?" She could see that everyone was scared. "Aunt Kathy, forgive us." The girls began to cry. "What are you saying?" The woman felt her head start to hurt. "Fiona." Catherine stopped talking. "What Fiona? Where is she?" Her hands began to shake and twitch. "We do not know. We thought she ran home," sobbed the girl. Jesus came back into the house, threw on a scarf and put on Katie's shoes. "What happened?" Trevor came out to her. "Fiona is missing," began to cry a woman. "Quick, we need to look for her." He got ready too. All together, including Georgia, they rushed towards the woods. They didn't go a few meters when they saw Anthony and company. They were carrying someone in their arms. Donald, his mother, fell to her knees in front of him. "Mom, those scumbags stabbed him," Anthony said quickly. "What's going on?" She looked up at her son. "He needs to go to the hospital," said someone from behind. "Quick." To the next station, the mother commanded. The boys dragged him there. Katie turned his sweater back, looked. The wound wasn't big, but it was serious. She did as she had been taught. Donald was in serious condition, needed to go to the hospital. An ambulance was called. They needed to look for Fiona. She was in the same woods as the bandits. "Will you stay with him?" the mother asked her son. "No, let's go with us," the friend suggested. "The guys would be more useful in the forest." "Okay." The group headed back to the place they had just returned from. Fiona was nowhere to be found. No matter how much her mother and the boys shouted, no one answered them. "Oh my God, where is my daughter?" Crouched down on her knees and began to sob Katie. Her head was hurting worse and worse. It felt like it was about to split in two. "Mom, go home. We're on our own here," Anthony pleaded with her. "You've already done everything yourself." She couldn't calm down. The search continued into the night, but there were no results. "We need to go home, eat and change," Trevor said calmly. "How can you say that when your daughter is missing?" She screamed. "Good. Then we need to get a bigger group together," he understood. And just like his wife, he wanted to cry. "Fiona, Fiona," screamed the mother at the top of her voice. But again there was silence in response. Katie calmed down. She's probably really scared and hiding. Her husband took her by the shoulder. "Leave me alone, everyone," the mother shouted again. Her husband lifted her up and carried her home. She grimaced and scratched, but he tolerated it. The boys gathered more people and went to comb the woods. When Katie had taken a sedative, she went to the nurse's station, but there was no one there. Donald had been taken away in an ambulance. "Trevor, please, let's go to the woods." She sat on the couch and cried. "Now when the guys come back, we'll replace them." He showed her there were still a few people waiting outside. "Okay," put her head down in her arms, his wife. Time passed and Fiona was still nowhere to be found. Morning came. Everyone was exhausted, but there was nothing they could do. "Let's go." Trevor took his wife's hand. They searched every corner of the forest, but the girl was nowhere to be found. "What do we do? Was she dead?" Katie asked. Horrible images came to mind, but the woman didn't want to think about it. It couldn't be. Her husband cradled her in his arms. The search continued. The boys were screaming, looking under bushes and trees. Trevor dragged his wife home again. She felt sick. She was passing out. She needed to rest. "What about you?" She looked at her husband. "Hand me back," he pointed to the woods. "Good." She collapsed exhaustedly onto the bed. Katie lay staring at the ceiling. She couldn't imagine what would happen to her if her daughter was gone. What if those scumbags caught her and abused her? She covered her eyes with her hands again and started crying hard. "Don't," approached her Georgia, who just entered the house. "Don't," she screamed. There the girls came who were taking Donald to the hospital. The woman tried to speak softly so as not to make things worse. "Where is he? What's wrong with him?" She jumped out of bed. "He's in the hospital. His organs have been hit." Her neighbor took her hand. "I have to be with him." She snuggled into George's shoulder and sobbed. "Yes, of course, we'll find Fiona and go," she told her. Would we find her? Katie didn't believe it anymore. "We will," the woman was sure of it. They packed up and went into the woods. Georgia had packed a large bag of provisions to feed those who were in the woods. No. Katie approached her husband. No. He shook his head. Why? Why is this happening to my children? Screamed the woman. She was just walking down the path, and she saw a tree with a big hollow. Katie had passed by here before, or so she thought. She smiled, remembering how she and her daughter used to play squirrels. They would find a tree with a hollow. Fiona, because she was small, would climb right in, and Kathy would bring her various leaves, mushrooms, berries. Then they'd put them on thin twigs, and like squirrels, they'd make them for the winter. A hollow. She stopped when she had already passed this tree. With all her legs, the woman rushed toward it. She clung to the edge, pulled herself up, grabbed onto a branch. Fiona. She saw the girl sitting at the very bottom. Mama? She looked up, her face tearful. The hollow was such that it had no bottom, or bugs, or from old age. The trunk became decrepit, so the girl just fell through. Everybody get in here! Katie started yelling. After a few minutes, she realized she couldn't be heard, thought her daughter might have been yelling too. But she couldn't be heard. Katie ran out into the open, folded her arms, brought them to her mouth and screamed. Trevor! It rang out over the forest. Everyone who was there rushed to the voice. Scream! Yelled a man in response. I'm here. She didn't stop. They were found quickly, the woman showing her husband where their daughter was. She was pulled out, freed from captivity. My little one, my mother held her skinny body close to her. She needs to go to the hospital. She hasn't been drinking or eating for a long time, Trevor said. Yes. That's just where Donald is, agreed Katie. At that moment, something clicked in her head, and she started to settle down. Katie, her husband shouted. Everyone drove to the hospital together. Trevor, Katie, Anthony, and Fiona. They were worried about the mother and the girl. When they pulled up to the clinic, Katie still hadn't regained consciousness. Woman to the operating room, take the girl for a checkup, the doctor said. Trevor and Anthony stayed in the hallway. Anthony was in the intensive care unit. There was no way to get to him, so they just had to wait. Your girl is all right, a little dehydration, but it is not terrible, the doctor brought her. What about your wife? Trevor wanted to know. It's more complicated. Suspected stroke. He was not in the operating room, so he didn't know exactly. We'll wait, the man said. Maybe Fiona and I can go home, the guy asked. Okay, the father replied sadly. How much time passed? No one knew. Finally, a doctor came out of the door of the operating room. Tell me what's wrong with my wife. Trevor ran up to him. Stroke, he lowered his eyes. The operation was successful, but the results will be later. Trevor sat down on the couch again. He saw his wife being taken to the emergency room. Her head was bandaged. The man covered his eyes with the palms of his hands and cried. Now it was necessary to wait for her to come to her senses. It is not worth sitting here. Everyone is very tired. Go home, rest, and tomorrow, closer to the evening, be here. The nurse asked him. What if she wakes up and I'm not here? The man asked. No, she didn't confirm his fears. Then Trevor thought that there were children at home who were also unwell. Packed up and drove there. He was very nervous. He had to hold on. As if someone had jinxed you, Georgia told him, who had already fed Fiona and put her to bed. Don't say that, Trevor agreed, even though he didn't believe it. They sat in the kitchen and were silent, for there was nothing to say. I'm going to town, Anthony said. Why? His father didn't understand. I have to live there anyway. They promised me a dormitory 2 weeks before school, and there are only 2 days left. You're here with Fiona and I'm there, with my mom and brother. As soon as everything is fine, I'll call you, promised his son. Okay. We'll figure it out tomorrow. Now, everyone needs to rest. He ran his hands over his face. Katie came to. Her head hurt. She lay back and smiled. Is everything okay? The young girl came up to her. Who are you? She kept a smile on Katie's face. I work at this hospital, she explained. Am I in the hospital? The girl saw that the woman was saying something strange. She went out into the hallway to get the doctor. He came in, examined Katie. What is your name? He asked her. Katie, she answered. Okay, do you have children? He didn't really care. He just wanted to know if her memory was okay. Yes, 3. She was still smiling. Good. He made some marks in his notebook and left. Katie was lying down. She was looking out the window. Her head hurt. Hello, doctor. Can you tell me what's wrong with my mother? Asked Anthony, who had just walked in. Greetings, I can tell you that she is mostly fine. She understands everything and recognizes everyone. But her condition is close to schizophrenia. If another event happens, she will just go out of her mind. It wasn't exact, but very similar. What do we do now? Anthony was upset. We need to take care of Mom. She shouldn't worry, the doctor advised. Okay, I understand you. Can I go to her? Asked the guy and was ready to go out. Yes, but carefully, advised the man in the white coat. The guy opened the door and ran to the room where the mother was lying. Hi? He sat down beside her and took her hand. Anthony, she looked at him. Mom, everything is going to be okay. He spoke in a calm tone. Where is Donald? She questioned him. He's feeling better now, too. The boy tried to work around the sharp edges. Is he sick? His mother raised an eyebrow. No. He's fine. Anthony realized she didn't remember the knife wound. Then what's he better at, she wondered. Work. The son found something to say. Understandably, she leaned back on the pillow. Anthony looked at his mother, feeling sorry for her, because it was all their fault that her head had gotten so bad. He fixed her blanket and went to his brother. He walked into his room. Donald was lying there, pale, and it was obvious he wasn't feeling well. Hello, he said and cringed. Any movement was painful. How are you? His brother came closer to the bed. I'm fine. Donald squeezed himself out. Mom's awake, she's fine, he told his brother. He just nodded back. Anthony stood still and went to the dormitory where he lived. On the way, he wondered why all this was happening to them. But he couldn't think of anything to say. Where do you disappear all day long? His friend asked him. My brother and Mom are in the hospital here, he answered truthfully. I see you are good that you do not leave them, praised his neighbor. After that, nothing was usual. Anthony went to the hospital every day. He helped his mother to get up. They took a little walk. Then he would go to his mother. She needed to be fed. He took care of her as best he could. Sometimes his father and Fiona came. They too did everything they could to get their relatives healed and home soon. Finally, the doctors said they could both be taken away. Only Donald mustn't do anything heavy, and Kathy mustn't worry or it would be worse than it is now. Kathy, Trevor, Donald, and Fiona drove back to the village, and Anthony stayed behind to study. That's it. Things are going to be different now, Katie assured everyone. She really had something with her head. She was always asking what was wrong, forgetting the most basic thing. The doctor said that's what happens when the brain refuses to remember something bad or related. Okay, sweetheart, you just take it easy. He walked over and hugged her. Kathy continued to work, as did Trevor. Donald had taken a job at the village hall. He did next to nothing there. But he's at work all day, busy, no time for nonsense. Sit down at the table. I've made a pie. Mother called everyone to the table. Georgia came in. She felt sorry for the woman, too. Oh, it was delicious. Everyone enjoyed the flavorful concoction. Anthony came once a month. There was no time and not much money. But when he did, his mother would have a party at home. Anthony, she kissed him. Mom, I got a summons. He pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket. How's the summons? It started to settle. Her husband was there to pick her up. She didn't even lose consciousness this time. Be careful. He looked at his son. What do we do? Anthony noticed that his brother was looking at him. Go to serve. Trevor said unambiguously. And the send-off. The son looked at his mother. How will she survive it? It'll be fine, his father promised. Good, then you need to write an application to the technical school. He was ready for it. Maybe they'll let you take the exams early, the parents speculated. I'll find out, Anthony realized. They sat around the table talking, Kathy cooking and serving her family various meals. Kathy, are you feeling okay? Trevor asked her that evening. Yes, why? She turned to him. Are you ready to give your son a send-off? Won't you faint? He wondered. I'll try. She wasn't sure about that. After that, Trevor went to Georgia. He told her everything to help. The woman was perfectly fine with the send-off. Now everyone was waiting for the summons to arrive for Donald. The young man was worried about his brother. Now conscripts could easily be thrown into a hot spot. But Donald did not say anything out loud. He, as well as others, just kept silent and prepared for the send-off. Mom, I'm here, Donald came home the next night. You're at it again. She saw his dazed eyes. And what? A little, can't you? He asked. You're sick. The disease could reveal itself at any moment, she cried. It's all right, it'll just open and close. Donald was sure of it. He worked. The salary was small, but there was. It so happened that in a year, Donald had saved up for a motorcycle. When his parents found out, they were shocked. How? How are you going to ride it? Shouted his mother. Normal, the boy was sure. He did not listen to anyone. He had his own opinion on everything, and even his mother could not change his mind. Fiona also started walking always with her brother. She was like his ponytail. What's it to you, you wonder? Mom asked. Yes, she answered. I don't understand. You have such an age difference. What are you doing with them? We're just socializing, the girl explained. Okay, but you mind your own business, the woman asked. I do. Fiona couldn't take the lecture anymore. Well, soon Anthony will be gone. What are we going to do without him? She began to wail in the evening. He doesn't live with us now. Her husband came to her. He was afraid of her attacks. But he is in a neighboring town. We can come to him, as well as he to us, she argued. Nothing could be done. Her husband sat down next to her. All right, we must, so we must, she said, and stood up. Donald was getting very upset about this. No, not because his brother was going into the army, but because they wouldn't take him there. Why, yes, he's a little sick, but he went to school with everyone else, did everything together, and now, like going to war. So Anthony did, and he did and he did. The day came when they had to gather their friend. The weather was beautiful outside, so they decided to gather outside. Tables were set out, which Georgia, along with Katie, set up. The guys came over, each wishing something for their friend. That's it. Enough with the admonishment. Anthony was tired of it. He had just recently met a girl. He wanted so much to confess his feelings, but he kept silent, thinking that he would come back. Then everything would start to spin. Son, right, his mother told him. Of course, he promised. The parties lasted till the night. The friends did not want to leave. The girls were crying. Trevor watched it all from the gate. He didn't realize how time had passed so quickly. Not long ago, his children had been little. They didn't bring any trouble. Katie was normal. And now one son is leaving to serve. His wife is not well with her head. What is this, old age? Dad, what are you standing there for? Anthony called out to him. I'm coming. He broke away from the pole and sat down with everyone at the table. It's late, boys. It's getting late. We should split up. His mother saw that Donald wasn't himself again. Tomorrow, I'll wait for everyone at the station, shouted Anthony. At night, the boy couldn't sleep. He heard that it was scary where he was going. Different thoughts came into his head. Son, wake up. His mom woke him up in the morning. Yeah, now, he opened his eyes. Katie was preparing his bag for the road. Trevor was supervising the process. Anthony washed up, dressed, and ready to go to the station. Hey, the girls were already there. Friends were pulling up. Anthony climbed into the cabin, One of the guys went with him to walk him straight to the station. And you and me, the girls, got into the seats too. Goodbye. Take care of yourself. Hugged her son mother. Good luck. Shook his father's hand. He held back tears. Goodbye, everyone. Do not remember and write. For the last time, waved the guy from the bus window. They drove on. Everyone was silent. The guy looked out the window as if he wanted to memorize how beautiful it was here. Tears stood in his eyes, but it could not be shown to anyone. The son left. The mother sat at home at the table. She did not understand how she would survive parting with him. Shall we go to George's? Her husband came up to her. Let's go. She stood up. The neighbor was always happy to see them. She set the table as she usually did, and they sat down to talk. How's your health? The woman asked Katie. I'm fine, Kathy shrugged. But her husband and Georgia noticed that she was starting to act a little differently. Good. They didn't bring it up again. After a brief sit, down the husband and wife went home. Kathy sat back in her seat at the table. For some reason lately, it was the one she had been occupying, and she could sit there for hours. Where are Donald and Fiona? She turned to her husband. I don't know. Out somewhere, Trevor shrugged. I'm worried about her. Why is she always walking with him? The woman spoke her concerns. On the other hand, it's a good thing, Trevor tried to reassure her. They heard some rumbling outside the window. What's that? Katie looked out. I don't know. Can't you see it? Her husband asked her. Not yet. The woman remembered what Donald had told her about the motorcycle. She got up from her seat. Let's go. Trevor took her hand. They went outside the gate just as Donald pulled up there on his motorcycle, Fiona sitting behind. Did you buy it after all? The man was examining the iron horse. Yes, I can ride it around the village now, the boy said proudly. Oh, son, be careful. His mother came up to him. It's all right. He hugged her. Where are you going? She looked at her daughter. Mom, why can't I go? Fiona resented not being allowed to socialize with her brother. Okay, just please be careful. She kissed the girl. The motorcycle started again, and the young people sped off into the distance. What do you think? She looked up at her husband. I don't know, he shrugged. Time passed. Anthony wrote letters. His father, when he received them at the post office, read them to his wife first. He was just afraid that his son would write something exciting, and Kathy would immediately feel bad. Look, another letter. He came home. The woman smiled. She waited every day to hear from her son. Her husband would read it aloud, omitting some details, and then they would write a reply together. One day that dreaded letter arrived. Anthony wrote that he was going to a hot spot. His father didn't understand why he had made that decision, but there was nothing he could do. Naturally, he didn't say anything to Kathy. He himself first wrote a reply with his wife, and then from himself. I'll go to the post office and mail it. He showed her the envelope. Good, she nodded and smiled. Trevor decided not to tell Donald about his brother either, so he wouldn't blab. On the way back, he stopped by George's. Hey, why are you alone? She wondered. Needing to talk, he sat down at the table. Okay, what's up? She sat down too. Anthony texted, says he's going to a hotspot. The woman was the only person he told about it. Oh, really? She put her hand over her mouth. I don't understand it myself. Kathy didn't say anything, and you don't say anything. He pressed a finger to his lips. Of course. She nodded. They sat for a while longer, discussed the latest news, and Trevor went home. Father, Anthony's friends are calling us to go for a ride, Donald shouted from a distance. Are you sure you can handle it? Dad got worried. Surely you've seen me ride, just Ace, he cocked his head. Fiona, why don't you stay home? The man insisted. No, it'll be so interesting. She took a firmer hold of her brother. Okay, just don't tell Mom later, Trevor whispered. The boys left, and he went into the house. Who were you talking to? Katie was sitting in her seat. Let's go to bed, he called his wife. It's so early. She looked at her watch. It's okay. He took her hand and led her to the bedroom. They lay down, talked for a long time, and soon fell asleep. Donald and Fiona met the boys at the edge of the village. Only 4 of them had motorcycles. They were going to go to the track and compete. "Who's first?" one of the boys asked. "Me," Donald raised his hand. "Good then, I'll go with you," the friends chimed in. "Dibs on me," Fiona asked her brother. No, it's gonna be really fast," he told her off. The boys got off the gas and started off, running parallel to each other. Donald won because he was really going fast. "Oh, you're good," said the one he was competing with, and shook his hand. "I can," Donald shook his rival's hand. Then one pair and the other took turns riding. Each time someone won, and then the winners competed. There were only 2 left, the ones who rode the fastest. Donald was one of them. "Cheer!" he shouted to his friends. Everyone hooted, and the boys got on their horses and rode into the wind. "Donald, you did well." One of the girls ran up to him. Fiona stood aside, resentful of her brother. Bringing her here and not paying attention, she turned away from everyone. "Sis, what's wrong?" Her brother came up to her. "Nothing. Not even once did not take me for a ride with the wind on the asphalt, all around the village. And the village." She did not turn around. "Sit down now, I'll roll like an honorary circle of the winner." He looked back. The friends were already parting. "Really?" She looked at him. Sure enough, he went to his bike, got on it. Fiona nestled in the back. She hugged her brother tightly as before. "Where are you going?" The other friends were surprised. "I'm taking my little sister for a ride," he waved at them. He accelerated, said something to Fiona, and they sped down the asphalt. Now there were no bumps or bumps, everything was smooth. Not a few seconds after they pulled away, a Kamaz showed up ahead. Friends saw Donald start to wiggle. What happened to him? Perhaps startled by the big oncoming car. Probably he wanted to turn around. A bang, a thud, and a scream, and then silence. Over there. After a little stupor, those who were watching all this shouted. The boys rushed in, but there was nothing they could do. Donald was lying in an unnatural pose on the road, Fiona in the other direction on the grass. "The girl's still alive," shouted the Kamaz driver. He radioed for an ambulance. The ambulance had to wait for some time. Fiona was alive. She was very badly bruised, but she was breathing unlike her brother. Trevor and Katie had long been asleep when the windows in the door began to bang. "Who is it?" The man woke up. He went to the door, opened it, and there was a bunch of people almost knocking him off his feet. "Uncle Trevor, Donald, Fiona," they shouted at each other. "Calm down, will you explain what happened?" He looked up with dazed eyes. Donald had crashed. Fiona was alive. She was in hospital. At that moment, the wife appeared on the doorstep, and as soon as she heard that, she fainted. "Get out!" Trevor shouted at the young people. "Katie!" He ran to his wife. He lifted her in his arms and put her on the sofa, and went to get someone to look after his wife while he was away, calling for Georgia. "What again?" He woke her up too. "They say Donald crashed his motorcycle with Fiona," he said quietly. "What?" Neighbor's eyes bulged. "I don't know what's wrong with them, but Katie heard it all and she's not feeling well now." He rushed her. When Georgia left for Trevor and Katie's house, Trevor ran to the village hall to make a call. The ambulance didn't arrive quickly. Katie never recovered. She was taken away. Trevor went with her. At the hospital, he reliably learned that his son was no longer alive and his daughter was in intensive care, in extremely serious condition. He had not been told anything about his wife yet. Trevor was sitting in the corridor. He was crying. "I think your wife has gotten worse, but she's holding on. Maybe she doesn't believe it yet," he said. "Yeah." Trevor shook his head. "You can pick her up tomorrow morning. Here are the pills. Give them to her at the funeral." The doctor handed Trevor a packet. "Thank you." He didn't know what else to say. "I hope everything will be okay." The medic got up and walked down the hall. Trevor slept right there in the hallway on the couch. In the morning, he walked in on Katie. She was looking at him with eyes that were so scary. "Where's Donald?" she asked him in the voice she'd used to speak to him before his illness. "In the morgue," her husband didn't lie. "Why? Why him?" she cried. Trevor unsealed the packet and gave it to his wife. She obediently drank the pill. Fiona. She couldn't hold back the tears. "She's in the hospital. She's doing fine," her husband lied. They spent some more time in the hospital and then took their son's body and drove to the village. After the pills the doctor had given Trevor, Katie was generally immobile. She was doing something, but she was like a doll. No emotion, nothing at all. The funeral was quiet. The mother sat by her son's coffin and cried. Everyone felt sorry for her. Georgia didn't understand how she hadn't gone mad herself. This had happened. "We need to go to the hospital, to Fiona," Trevor said to the neighbor, when everything settled down. "Yeah, you go, and I'll stay with Katie," she told him. Trevor did his best, but Fiona had outlived her brother by only 8 days. He sat and cried and didn't know what to do. Then the man made a strong-willed decision. He took his daughter's body, arranged for cremation, paid the money. He drove to the village with a small vessel containing Fiona's ashes. He had dug up for his son in the cemetery. "Back already?" Georgia asked him. "Yes, I have good news for you," said the man, making a happy face. "And what's that?" Kathy, when she wasn't taking pills, was adequate. "Fiona has been taken to the clinic to recover there." He smiled. "That's good. Let the girl get better," Katie said. "Do they send children without their parents?" Georgia questioned. "She's not a child. She's 12 years old." Trevor put his finger to her lips to keep her quiet. "Then I see," nodded the neighbor. She didn't know the truth yet. They all sat together. The father's heart was breaking with grief, and he couldn't even speak. In the evening, when he went to see the neighbor off, he told her everything. She looked at him with big eyes. "Trevor, where have you been?" Katie looked at him. She wasn't the same. "Out in the yard," he told her. And a month later, the thing that everyone had been dreading happened. Trevor was at work. A man came up to him. He said there was a mailman waiting for him outside. "What?" He came out. "I'm sorry." He put a telegram in his hands. His son was being taken to the motherland in a zinc coffin. "No." He fell to his knees, then got up and caught up with the man. "Please don't tell anyone. My wife will go crazy if she finds out," he begged him. "I'm not supposed to," the man replied. "What is it?" A comrade came up to him. "Nothing." He folded up the paper and put it in his pocket. Georgia, grief, he ran into her house without even knocking. What again? She was no longer surprised. Anthony Trevor couldn't get any further. "No way." She looked out the window. "Tomorrow I'll go to town for the body," he said. She supported him in everything. She said she'd do whatever he said. Trevor drove into town, arranged a car, said he needed to move building materials, wanted to make an outbuilding in the village. We agreed on a price. He came to the military enlistment office. There he was offered that the funeral would be at the expense of the state with a guard of honor, but the man refused. "You see, I have such a situation," he told him. "He wants to bury his son quietly." "Well, that's your business," the man in uniform told him. He threw a tarp over the coffin, told the driver that he had loaded everything, and they drove off. "Why at night?" The man behind the wheel didn't understand. "It just happened," Trevor shrugged. They arrived at his house. The streets were deserted, and only Georgia stood at her gate watching to make sure no one went in. 2 local backwoodsmen were prepared to help the man. They sprang out of the back alley and dragged the coffin over to the fence. Here, Georgia gave them some more. "That's it. Thanks. Go inside." He waved her off. He cleaned the toilet and shoved the coffin into the cesspool. It didn't sink, so Trevor had to dig it even deeper. By morning he was exhausted, but he was done. The toilet was still there, nothing inside. "Ah, you smell," Katie said when he came back to her. "I don't know." He pretended to sniff his hands. We've got to get the bath heated. His wife got up and went into the kitchen. Trevor did as she wanted. They washed up and came back into the house. Do you know why Anthony doesn't write for so long and there are no letters from Fiona? Katie asked her husband. He'll definitely come tomorrow, Trevor said. He realized that this was his puncture. When Kathy was busy, he would sit in the other room and write. Then he'd go outside and pretend to get something out of a drawer. And then he and his wife would read together. Oh, Trevor, what have we done? A mother should know everything about her children, Georgia told him. I'll take her away from here, the man said. The two of them lived together, but Trevor started drinking because he couldn't bear it all. At some point, he couldn't take it anymore. Went to the barn and hanged himself there. And in the morning, when Katie couldn't find him, she went out into the yard, and the barn doors were open. She looked in and passed out. I noticed it late, when she was on the ground, and I ran out, and there was this picture, Georgia said. Wow. Story, Steve was sitting there looking at her. We took Katie to the hospital and buried Trevor. She herself left there to live here so there wouldn't be too many questions. She cried with tears already visible. Where is Kathy now? Steve asked her. She was in the clinic for a couple of months and then she was transferred to a specialized center. The old lady answered. I see. There was a family and then there wasn't. Steve shook his head. He looked out the window. It was getting light. He realized he'd been here all night. Okay, I'm gonna go. He got up. I'm not afraid to die now. She looked at the man. Come on, you'll live a long time. He shook her hand and left. He decided to get home on foot. It would be time to think it over. He walked along the road and could not imagine how such a fate could be for people. It was impossible in his head. He reached home in the village quickly. In an hour, there was a bus to the city. He wanted to take it. I went to the station, bought a ticket, and went. Allison, it's me, he shouted from the doorstep. What are you doing up so early? She rolled over onto her other side. But when her husband began to tell her what he'd learned tonight, she was wide awake. She sat up in bed and blinked. What do you think? He asked her. We should call the police and give the guy a proper burial, she said. I was thinking the same thing. Looked at Steve's watch. The husband and wife had been out of the house since morning. They were in a hurry to get to the station. Hello. We're here about the coffin that was found in the sinkhole, said Steve to the officer on duty. Come on in. He pointed them in the right direction. They went into the investigator's office and told him everything they knew. He sat there, his face growing more and more drawn out. Do you believe it? He asked. Well, how not to believe? If all the evidence is in the face now, it was Steve's turn to be surprised. All the documents were filled out. They agreed that the motorcade would be organized. They also agreed on the time. What now? Steve and Allison came out of the department. I want to find Kathy. The man looked at his wife. Okay, where do we start? She didn't understand. The hospital. He caught the car and they drove off. Hello, I'd like to find out any information about Kathy. He approached the front desk. Right away, the girl started poking around on the computer. Yes, here, who are you? She stared at the couple. I'm a brother. Stepbrother, the man added. Okay. She told them what clinic she was in. Steve and Allison drove to the mental health clinic. They walked up to the gate. They had to fill out a bunch of paperwork to get in. They were greeted by the doctor. Steve explained to him that he had not seen his sister for a long time. She had disappeared somewhere, but now he found her. The doctor understood him, turned and showed him the direction. She always sits by the window, reading something on paper, the doctor said. Okay, thank you. They went that way, where the man directed them. Kathy was indeed sitting by the window. There were several envelopes lying on the windowsill. They were so tattered you could tell they were more than 1 year old and were constantly being opened. Kathy, the man called out to her gently. Are you for me? She turned around, looking indifferent. Yes, you, he nodded. What did you want? She stood up and walked over to them. Tomorrow your son will be buried in the village. Will you come with us? He asked her. My son is alive here. He writes letters to me every week. She showed to the strangers. So you don't want to, Steva realized, that it was all useless. No. She shook her head, went and sat back in her seat. Steva and Ellison realized there was nothing more for them to do here. They walked towards the exit. Trevor, they heard Katie's voice. What? The man turned around. Is it true? She asked Steve, even though she thought it was her husband Trevor. Yes, he nodded. Good. Pick me up from the hospital and I'll come with you. After saying that, she went somewhere down the corridor. Doctor, her son will be buried tomorrow. Can we take her? Steve asked the man. You know, I can't give such permission. Only if by our car and with nurses. He couldn't help but let the woman go to her son. Okay, even that would be fine, nodded the man. Why would you want to do that? Ellison asked her husband. At least let him see for the last time that all her children were together. He himself didn't know why Steva would do that. Fine, do as you please, she agreed. The next day, the car from the hospital and an ordinary car drove to the very village where Kathy had once lived. They headed straight for the cemetery. This way, Steve showed her. They came to the Ellison place where Kathy's son and daughter were buried, during which time the girl had also been given a memorial. Donald, Fiona, she sat down on the bench. Recognized it? Ellison whispered to her husband. Yes, he nodded. And after that, the honor guard lined up. A wooden cross with Anthony's picture on it was made, but the woman sat still. Only when the shots rang out did she flinch. Are you all right? The man asked her. Yes, I need to get home in case a letter arrives and I'm not there. She looked up at Steve. Okay, he looked at the nurses. They got up and put her in the car. Goodbye, the woman waved to them from the window. Goodbye. Steve stood and watched with his wife as the car drove away. Poor woman, did she think her life would turn out this way? Cried Ellison. No one knows what might happen next. Steve turned to her. He saw Grandma Georgia approaching them. Hello, he shouted to her. Agassi, she walked over to the fresh grave and knelt down. Is that the neighbor? Ellison guessed. Yes, he walked in her direction. Did you bring Katie in? Granny asked. I wanted her to see her children, Steva admitted. And what, you think she was relieved? She looked up at him. I don't know, maybe. He took his wife's hand and they went to their new, unfinished house. What are we going to do? Ellison turned to him. Move on. They were already approaching the gate. The woman didn't want to go into the yard. And let's call a priest. He will sanctify everything here, suggested the husband. That's a good idea, Ellison hugged him. So they did, and when the neighbors saw all these rituals, they decided to do the same. For a long time, there was gossip in the village about the coffin Steve had found, but years later, everything is forgotten. Steva and Ellison live happily in this house. Children come to visit them. They don't know the story that happened to them, but perhaps someday they will be told. Georgia died 6 months after all this. Steva personally organized her funeral, and Ellison helped him. May you do well there, crossed the man the grave of Katie and Trevor's children. Let's go, Ellison called out to him. They went home and thought no more about it.